Starting us off at number 10, SCP-432. You walk through the dark corridors of a maze in search of a box, before the monster can get you. The monster is of course SCP-432, and is the main antagonist of the game. He can appear randomly and typically has a pair of glowing red eyes if the player is not in sight. If you run into the monster, you will instantly die and be sent back to the main menu. The gameplay consists of walking through corridors, you will find various objects throughout the maze, and also hear lots of scary sounds. This game probably isn't the scariest, hence the high placement, but Markiplier did seem to be terrified while playing. In all honesty, he was probably faking it for the camera, but it's not like he was falling out of his chair crying. If you would like to play this, however, I suggest you check it out. You can find it online, just search up SCP-432 game on Google and it should be easy enough. Next up at number 9, SCP-087. Released January of 2012, SCP-087 is a first-person survival horror game. With the only controls being movement and quip, you know this game must be a creepy one. The player starts off in a stairwell that is being tested by the Foundation. The player must wander through several floors. There are a set number of floors per round, however it varies round to round. One time you can play and have 34 floors, the next round 100, but it typically ranges from 60 to 150. You win the game by making it to the last floor, but as you approach, you can see SCP-0871's face in the darkness. If you get close enough, SCP-0871 will charge at the player, causing the game to crash. So be quick or be careful, if you can even make it there. While going down the levels, you will have various screen effects and scary noises that will probably make you want to quit, run to your mommy, have her say she loves you, then go right back to the game because that's the kind of person you are. Number 8, SCP-087-B. Think of this as an expansion pack to SCP-087. Released 11 days after SCP-087, SCP-087-B adds more levels and more monsters. The floors now range from 150 to 180, and you're being hunted by a plethora of monsters that you must evade, since the Foundation didn't give you a gun. Why? I don't know, it's like they're sending you down there for sport. You must evade the Masked Man, who is a dark humanoid with a white mask who manifests themselves in the darkness and will instantly kill the player on contact. The Red Mist Monster, another humanoid with glowing white eyes and red markings who acts similar to the Masked Man, but changes the location in which it spawns. And the Cheshire Smile. Just your typical run-of-the-mill disembodied twisted smile with piercing white eyes. It does not hurt the player, however, and it is simply used as a scare tactic when it whispers no into your ear and then starts staring at you. Man, that's weird, that's how I flirt. And at 7, SCP-4666. There should be a video game just about the Yule Man, and trying to defend your family and yourself from a seemingly unstoppable threat. SCP-4666, also known as the Yule Man, is a humanoid entity of unknown age, but he's older than Betty White. He's a very tall elderly man who always appears naked even when outdoors in freezing weather. He's active for a 12-day period once a year, from the night of either December 21st or 22nd to the night of January 1st or 2nd, depending on the start date. During this time, the SCP creates what are called Weissnot events, where SCP-4666 will appear at dwellings in locations above 40 degrees north latitude. All homes he visited had something in common: a child under the age of 8, an isolated location, and an area covered in snow for the 12 days. During the first week, the children of the home will see the SCP lurking outside, like in the forest behind the tree watching the house, or even sometimes at their window watching them sleep. From nights 8 to 11, parents will hear sounds coming from the roof and attic, and will begin to smell an ungodly odor with seemingly no source. On night 12, one of two things will happen: the family will be tortured and killed, aside from the youngest, who will be taken by the SCP, or the SCP will leave toys made of human flesh at the end of the children's beds. Yeah, imagine a game like Night Blights, but with the Yule Man. Okay, I'd play it. And at 6, SCP Terminal. SCP Terminal is the first text-based SCP game, taking inspiration, structure, style, and lore from the SCP Foundation wiki, with the addition of the ambient horror felt by most other games based on the Foundation, while also adding a creative twist. It has the largest goal of any SCP game, adding every single SCP from the entire SCP Foundation wiki into the game. It was geniusly made from a custom engine created by cobbling together piles of random scripting programs and even exploiting the bugs in its own system to allow for a game of this scale to be made with like Scratch. The creator is hosting votes on what new SCPs should be added first, and posts regular updates and such through his Twitter account @Abarano. While this game will take a while to be fully complete, the game does get updated regularly, so if you're a text-based fiend and love the feel of those kind of games, go check it out. And at 5, SCP-096. SCP-096 is also known as the Shy Guy, who remains docile unless provoked, which then turns him extremely hostile and and aggressive. He has very little muscle mass and appears to be suffering from malnutrition, arms that extend to his knees, and his skin lacking pigmentation. Provoking this SCP is quite simple. All one must do is see his face, even if accidental. Once you have seen SCP-096's face, he will stop at nothing until he has killed you. After killing the provoker, he will sit down for several minutes before becoming docile once again. This SCP actually has his own game. SCP-096 is available in browser as well as on iOS and Android devices, where he has escaped his containment, and for some reason, you give yourself the task of tracking him down. He also appears in SCP Containment Breach and can be seen in all metal corridors, the gated hallway, gas catwalk, and three-way gas catwalks. And if you do see his face, it's just the face itself is creepy as hell. In at 4, SCP Secret Laboratory. Deep within the SCP Foundation during a containment breach, many of the anomalies have bypassed security and escaped from their chambers without peaceful intentions. Become site personnel, a recontainment agent, or an anomalous entity, and fight to take control or escape the facility. The underground facility suffers from multiple breaches from various SCP objects which escape their containment chambers. During this event, multiple players are given roles to play. Class D personnel, prisoners kept for the purpose of being lab rats. Their mission is to escape the facility without getting any attention from others. Nine-tailed fox, team designated to neutralize the danger and rescue scientists. Breach attendant that tries to escape the facility alive. SCP Object, anomaly trying to kill as many people as possible. I relate. Currently only a few SCP objects can be found in game, but progressively their numbers will grow in oncoming updates, so be wary of that. Can also be Chaos Insurgency, Foundation traitors trying to help Class D to escape in order to obtain helpful information. The randomly generated facility and role division makes every game special and full of sensations. The winning team is the one that finishes all of its objectives, so you can gather your friends and lock yourself in a containment site with dangerous monsters who want to eat your face. In the game you can encounter SCP-172, SCP-106, SCP-049, SCP-914, SCP-096, SCP-939, and SCP-079. In at 3, SCP Containment Breach Survival. What the actual hell is this game? From what I've seen, this is total bull and the actual monsters are the stuff of game devs' nightmares. To start with, the map you play on is a simple Area 51 map that you see everywhere. I myself have seen it multiple times while playing things that weren't paintball, but that was back when I was a child. But now it's being used as a containment facility. I thought the raid was last year, guys. Plus, this version, while free, is still far worse than the actual Containment Breach game. But these damn SCPs are some of the worst that you will ever see in a game. Forget 87 for being boring, forget Blackout for having original characters. These are by far the worst things you will ever see. They are literally just GIFs. GIFs! The one I saw was just a skeleton doing the wave over and over with a black background, for crying out loud. At least have it be transparent. How the hell am I supposed to play something like that and then not put it on this list? This has got to be one of the most ridiculous SCP Roblox games out there. And we're not even done! Penultimately at number 2, SCP Unity. This game started off as a port and graphics update for SCP Containment Breach. However, since initial release it has become its own game. It has expanded to include a wider array of content, such as new SCPs, a deeper and richer story, and graphic improvements. The game, however, is years from completion, so it does not take the number 1 spot, and for another reason which you'll see why in a minute. But this game beats out the original because the gameplay has been improved significantly. The SCPs have been improved as well and have been added onto. You can now encounter SCPs 106, 173, 178, 207, 330, 500, 553, 650, 714, 914, 939, 983, 1079, 1499, and 1762. So yeah, significant improvement, with the upcoming addition to SCP-131 and the inclusion of anomalous ducks. Whatever that is. You'll have to see what I mean for yourself, and I'll have to see it too, because my god, anomalous ducks. Finally, taking our number 1 spot, SCP Blackout. SCP Blackout is by far going to be the most intense of all of these games. You play as a D-class officer in the secret SCP research site, Site 50. When everything falls apart, you need to use what you can to explore the facility, access logs to learn about what you're encountering, and run for your life from the SCPs that have escaped. This game is currently in early access, but there is a story mode which is not yet available. And there's also a survival mode. This game is at the top of the list because unlike any others that I found, you can play this game in virtual reality. You can literally put yourself in this situation and piss your pants. I get scared at the spiders in Skyrim VR. How the hell could I do this? I do, however, have an Oculus and feel as if I should try it. I don't know, it looks actually terrifying from the trailers and screenshots, but maybe that's a good thing. In at 10, SCP-978. SCP-978 seems to be a normal black and white Polaroid camera, with no distinct markings or damage, no writing or initials carved in. It operates the same as a normal camera, and shows no anomalous properties aside from the photos produced. When a subject is in a picture taken by SCP-978, the photo that develops isn't of what the photographer shot, but instead shows what the subject truly wanted to be doing at the moment the photo was taken. The effect appears to be random in level, sometimes drastically changing the surroundings and showing the subject's deepest desires, or simple changes and alterations to the image, like adding a football in their hand. The SCP also seems to be capable of expressing the desires of non-human creatures. For example, SCP-451 is a man who cannot see or hear, but when photographed he was shown surrounded by people he was interacting with in a normal way. And SCP-516, a sentient war tank who wants world peace, was shown in a world where he was no longer required, and completely overgrown with flora as birds sat on its main cannon. I think this would be an interesting game in itself. Like, you need to find something but need to find out who has the information, so you use the camera to help find it. I think it would be cool, I'd play it. In at 9, SCP-196. SCP-196 is a middle-aged man. He claims to be 47, but the Foundation hasn't tried to confirm. Subject has black hair and brown eyes and has no anomalous abilities, but he's literally just a normal dude but experiencing institutionalization and Stockholm Syndrome towards the Foundation staff. The subject was recruited as Class D personnel via normal means, and claims that his younger self is currently living in another location on the planet. The Foundation has confirmed that SCP-196 has encountered Foundation personnel in the past, in an incident at another containment site in the 1960s. During that incident, he was far older than he currently is, and was killed by security during an attempted break-in. While normal events like this would result in a subject being offed, doing so may cause a catastrophic paradox. SCP-196 must be kept alive until he decides to escape on his own accord, and somehow travels to experience his own death at the hands of Foundation personnel back in the 1960s. This would be one hell of a game. Can you imagine either playing as SCP-196 or as a Foundation member trying to protect the current version while coaxing him to try to escape, and having to protect the youngest version at the same time? I think it would be really cool, okay? Leave me be. Number 8, SCP-2639. SCP-2639 is what we all wanted back in 1996. Well, I say we all, but those of us who were alive. I wasn't. An infinite Quake game. The game manifests as a 1 kilometer cubed area where anomalous entities and objects materialize then dematerialize approximately 1 to 2 hours later. An invisible wall stops any instance inside the area from leaving the area. There are 3 humanoid entities equipped with weaponry and armor inside the area. Each individual has super speed, strength, and endurance. When one of these entities is destroyed, another version spawns. There are also items that spawn, that when picked up by the players will give them new weapons and stuff like that. These instances are also linked to a computer that runs without being connected to an outlet. My god, I wish. The computer has been running a Quake server since 1997, the same day the 3 players went missing. Many attempts to communicate with the individuals have been successful, resulting in chat logs between Foundation personnel and the players, where they are actively trying to get the players out of the game. The players can manifest in the real world, being able to kill anything, but being unable to die themselves, and they found this out the hard way. They spawned in a park and killed what they thought were zombies, but have now become a special task force for containment breaches. So maybe put them in that game, or have them as a playable team in a secret laboratory or something like that, because holy crap, I want to go around shooting people with rockets. In at 7, SCP-096 Modest. Subject 96 is an emotionally disturbed mutant emitting screams, moans, and cries. Most of the time he spends sitting against the wall, muttering incoherently, and covering his face with his hands. Threat at the times of outbursts of aggression is high, but these bursts are typically caused by closely examining his face. In this game you play as a Foundation member going about daily patrols until there is an announcement that SCP-096 has escaped, and you give yourself the task of tracking it down. The game is free to play and it can be done in browse, so no messy file folders, zips, or even EXEs, which is unfortunate since I know you all love EXEs so much. This game, however, if you'd like a portable version, is also available on iOS and Android devices, so if you'd rather make your pants brown on the subway, then opt for this version instead. And at 6, SCP-426. There is no way to describe myself without referring to myself in the first person. I am an ordinary toaster. I can toast bread using electricity, but when any human mentions me, they unintentionally refer to me in the first person, even if they're unaware of me. There is no way of speaking or writing about me in the third person as of yet, and if you remain within my presence for too long, you will begin to identify yourself as a toaster, and unless forcibly restrained, you will ultimately harm yourself in your attempts to become a toaster. For example, when I was found, one member of the family had tried to swallow an outlet, one had stuffed herself with bread causing her stomach to burst, and the only survivor was suffering from malnutrition because they ate a piece of bread and were waiting for the toast to pop out. I think I would be an interesting addition to any of the SCP games, but I don't think I would make a good game on my own. Perhaps I'll be added to the next Containment Breach or Secret Laboratory update. That would be really interesting. I would like to see me in that game. That would be really interesting. I'd like to see me in that game. Halfway through number 5, SCP-173 demonstration. SCP-173 demonstration is literally what it says, a demonstration of what not to do in a Roblox game. All the models are free and are seen everywhere as per usual, and there is literally nothing to do in the game. Just like the last game, the spawn room can be camped by the SCP. But this is just god awful. There is literally nothing to do. You can even get a riot shield that does nothing. The shield! It does nothing! This is one of the worst things I've ever seen, and again, the map makes no sense. It's like it's the same map, just a different link or some other bull. Like, why does this happen? Why? This genuinely hurts me to have seen this kind of crap. It just actually hurts my feelings as well as just physically hurting me. I feel pain. And at 4, SCP-2984. A girl that is constantly on fire. Sounds like an enemy in a video game to me. SCP-2984 was discovered in Malaysia after several sightings by fire and rescue teams. The subject is constantly on fire, which has the ability to spread and be extinguished normally, however will reignite instantly if not submerged in water. This sounds like someone who should be running around in Containment Breach, who you need to avoid so that you don't burn to death, but who can also leave some fire behind and maybe set the whole building ablaze. I'm not sure how it would work, I just know that I want it to happen. I'm like the little girl with the burning house behind her. You know that meme? Throwback Thursday. Number 3, SCP-1048-A. A teddy bear made of pure ears. It can emit a high-pitched shriek that inflicts intense pain on the ears and eyes of anyone within 10 meters. If you come within 5 meters of the subject when it shrieks, you begin to grow ear-like extremities all over your body, completely covering it within 20 seconds. Every person affected with this condition dies within 3 minutes. The cause of death is asphyxiation, meaning the ears grew in both your mouth and throat enough to block airflow. You thought the teddy bear from Supernatural was bad? A teddy blowing his stuffing out with a gun can't even come close to one that will cause ears to grow in your mouth, all over your body, in your throat, and suffocate you. Imagine Sam and Dean trying to fight this damn thing. Side note, can we get another Supernatural-like show where like 2 brothers or something hunt SCPs? I can smell the next CW series. Again, $1 million for that idea. Willing to negotiate down to like 700,000. This SCP can also be found in SCP Containment Breach, and I'd do yourself a favor and just don't do it. Stay away. Ears. And at 2, SCP Containment. What if we had a game where instead of the SCPs escaping, we had SCPs that we have to actively find and contain? If a developer really wanted to get their name out there and be put on the map, imagine how good this game could truly be. They could add constant updates to it, adding more and more SCPs that need to be contained. And you would be assigned to go get each one, with a team of course. Imagine being tasked with capturing SCP-805, where you have to equip your team with items based on the information on the SCP Wiki. The case files on the website would literally become case files, and you would truly be able to see what it would be like to work for the Foundation. Sure, it would take a lot of time and a lot of effort, but if done well enough, it could make a whole game developer's career. And I'd play the hell out of it. You would never see me again. Finally, in at number 1, SCP-2424. This SCP is a video game boss in the real world. The SCP is a marine animal similar to a walrus that has 2 pairs of flippers, one normal and one muscular, and light purple skin. He carries an unidentified cannon that can fire up to 3 projectiles at once, kinda like cannonballs, and if anyone comes within 40 meters of the SCP, he will become extremely hostile until the one who entered is dead, or until you leave the area. There should just be a game where it's only this boss with these mechanics, and you just need to try and try again until you beat him. Maybe have an equipment room, and make it so that you can only hurt him when you're in the zone. I think that it would be incredible, and I would really like to see what he would look like, because oh my god, That sounds nuts. And at 9, SCP-049. Also known as the Plague Doctor, SCP-049 is generally cooperative with Foundation personnel. It resembles a Plague Doctor wearing a similar mask and wearing thick robes that seem to have grown out of its body over time, making them indistinguishable from the figure below. The SCP is capable of speech in a variety of languages but prefers English or French, so obviously Canadian, you might as well have a cup of Tim Hortons. SCP-049 can become hostile and aggressive if it senses the presence of the pestilence. It is unknown the exact nature of this pestilence and they don't know what it could be, but it is of grave concern to the SCP. If left unrestrained, he will attempt to kill any individual he deems afflicted with this pestilence. Anyone that he kills, he will begin surgery on immediately, turning them into SCP-0492, which are reanimated corpses of his victims. They retain no memories or mental functions and only have basic motor functions, and are under control of the SCP. So you can just sick them. And at 8, SCP-372. SCP-372 lurks in the shadows. Well, not exactly. The creature is of an unknown species, approximately 2 meters long and weighing approximately 45 kilograms. It's long and thin with 8 pairs of narrow limbs. That's 16 arms, guys. They are extremely fast and abnormally flexible. The SCP is so fast it is able to move behind you as you move your eyes, since there is a moment of temporary blindness when you look in a new location. It's actually true. Try it. Look at the screen and then look somewhere else without turning your head. If you pay close enough attention, you can tell that there is a split second where you see black. It is very short and hardly noticeable if you aren't looking for it, but SCP-372 is able to move from in front of you to behind you within that time frame. It prefers not to be seen, staying behind you or in your blind spots, and it is able to do this with every personnel member in its vicinity, even if there is multiple at once. And anyone pretending to see the SCP in front of them to prank nervous personnel will be severely reprimanded. And at 7, SCP-087. SCP-087 is the game that Operation Descent focuses on. SCP-087 is just a staircase with several levels, typically ranging from 60 to 150, but you knew that already, I've already described it. But why is it worse than Operation Descent? Well, because from what I've seen, the community finds this game to be boring. At least more boring than Operation Descent. One Steam user even said it was one of the most boring and worst SCP games of them all, but trust me, I dug even deeper, and while this may have been the worst mainstream game of the bunch, there are plenty more on other platforms, one in particular that blows this one out of the water. This game can be boring, since the floors are randomly generated and you have to deal with up to 150 of them, but sometimes you get a good RNG game, and this is what you really need to focus on here. Sure, all games have their bad moments, hell, even Skyrim does. Like, what was that final battle, man? Bethesda. But it's the good moments that you remember that really make the experience special. With that said, let's tear some Roblox games to shreds. And at 6, SCP-173. SCP-173 appears to be constructed from concrete and rebar, with traces of Krylon branded spray paint. He is extremely hostile but cannot move when within a direct line of sight. When being tested on, 2 persons must maintain eye contact until all personnel have vacated and relocked the container. Anyone inside the containment chamber must alert the other before blinking as to ensure the other one keeps his eyes open, and the object is reported to attack by snapping the necks at the base of the skull, or if he's feeling rather rude, just plain old strangulation. This is terrifying. This creature is the reason that SCP Containment Breach has a blinking feature, so that this thing is a threat and can't just be stared at the whole time. In this game, this is the first SCP you encounter, when you will watch it kill 2 guards and escape into the ventilation system. Well, the power is off, so you don't technically see it, but like, it's just scary, okay? Halfway through at number 5, SCP-3008. Ever been stuck aimlessly in an IKEA for hours? How about doing that in a video game, because we all know we don't want to go outside? Well, SCP-3008 is an endless IKEA world that has workers who want to kill you, settlements where you find other humans who trade, and furniture that you can break for materials, move around, and build things out of. Basically IKEA Minecraft. I was going to say Swedish Minecraft, but not just Swedish, isn't he? This game is multiplayer and does or will feature additional game modes, rather than just, I guess, survival. Like a tower building mode where players have to stack furniture as high as they can within a certain time limit, and a floor is lava mode. You can probably tell what that's gonna be. Number 4, SCP-XXXX. SCP-XXXX apparently seems to have a grudge against Foundation personnel. The SCP is a small cube, roughly 2 to 3 centimeters cubed, and whenever someone tries tries to describe SCP-X in more detail, the description they give deviates greatly from the original, such as pink monkey pork chop, a scum procrastinating cranberry kazoo, an elephant-like aardvark eating a corn on the cob stuffed toaster, and my ex. The anonymous properties, aside from being able to manipulate the description, involve controlling the actions of others. When within 10 to 20 meters of the object, any subject who performs an action the SCP doesn't like will be forced into doing the opposite of what they intended. Move your arm up, you'll move it down. Step forward, you'll step back. Turn right and you'll turn left. Attempt to contain SCP-X and you'll let it go. This has resulted in an unknown amount of containment breaches. Ironically, this SCP can only be found in SCP Blackout, which is currently in early access on Steam, so if you like early access, because it sounds high-tech or whatever, go check it out. And the 3, SCP-896. Think World of Warcraft, but your stats end up changing you accordingly if you name your character your full name. So your strength will make you stronger, your agility will make you more nimble and like a freaking ninja, and your charisma will make you more charismatic. While this may sound incredible, if any stat is 15% above any of your others, all other areas will suffer. So if you have 15% more strength than charisma, charisma along with everything but strength will get worse. A scientist also played this game as a test for a 9-hour binge period, but died for unknown reasons while playing, leading the Foundation to assume the game marathon had killed him. I think this should be a thing you can do in Secret Laboratory. If you're a human, you can go to a computer and play this, but while you do, you have the ability to die by other teams. But if you survive, you get buffed randomly, or debuffed randomly. Do it. Penultimately, at number 2, SCP-008. SCP-008 is a complex gas that essentially turns people into zombies. The traits of this SCP include 100% chance of infection, 100% chance of death, transmission through all bodily fluids and mucus. If infected, the individual will gain a high fever, increased red blood cell count, resulting in slow blood flow and increased muscle endurance and strength, decreased metabolism, high blood viscosity, conditioned behavior, and zombie-like actions. Neutralizing a fully infected subject requires significant cranial trauma, so a massive blow to the head, like a headshot. Like any form of zombie. Could you imagine if this was real? Like the real consequences of these creatures existing in our normal world? Maybe they already do, but they're better at containing them than we originally know. Or maybe these files are real, but disguised as fan forms to warn us and make us prepared. Finally, in at number 1, SCP-106. No physical interaction with SCP-106 is allowed under any circumstances. He must be contained in a sealed container comprised of 40 layers of lead-lined steel. Each layer must be separated by a minimum of 36 centimeters of empty space. He appears to be an elderly human, with very advanced decomposition. The rotting quality about him is consistent between all descriptions of SCP-106. While being observed, he will remain motionless, waiting for prey. SCP-106 is also capable of scaling any vertical surface and can remain suspended upside down indefinitely. When attacking, he will attempt to damage major organs, muscle groups, or tendons, and then pull the prey into a pocket dimension where he kills them. He is also capable of passing through solid matter, leaving behind a patch of corrosive black goo that will cause rusting, rot, decay, or cracking on any material touched. This effect will begin within seconds. Do you know how terrifying that is? Holy shit! And at 10, SCP Blackout. SCP Blackout is a desktop game where you are a new D-class personnel in the secret SCP research site 50, when everything falls apart. Use what you can find as you explore the facility, access the logs to learn about the SCP entities in containment, and run for your life from the SCP entities that have escaped. This game is by far the best on the list, so don't think I'm hating on it for 1 second. The added idea that you can play this in VR is some crazy crap, and I don't know if I'd be able to handle it in all honesty. However, the downside for this game is that it uses some original SCP characters. While yes, I understand that most SCPs are original, I mean he uses SCPs that aren't listed on the wiki. And while this may be refreshing to some, the diehard SCP fandom does on occasion like to tear this game apart because of it. So it's one of the worst if you want to stick to the real SCP lore, but not if you're fine with something a little fresh and new. In at 9, SCP Operation Descent. Operation Descent is a remake of SCP-087, the staircase that you wander through several floors of a random amount, typically ranging from 60 to 150. However, this game adds new areas and makes the game a little more interesting. However, again, not for those diehard SCP fans. It may actually make you combust with canon rage as you pick apart each individual level and prove it to not be canon. Basically, if you wanted to be on that old YouTube game show Actually, but for SCP lore, then this game will have you saying that in every sense of the sentence, and on every floor. Does anyone actually know what that game show is, though? Like, does anyone actually know it? I saw like one episode and the only question I remember is them saying that Gandalf is a human, but then someone chimed in and was like, actually Gandalf is a Maya, not a human. I'm like, no? Anyone? Anyone? Bueller? Just me? Okay. And it ate SCP-450. This game actually comes from the creator of SCP-3008, a game I've played on the channel, and about an infinite IKEA. It was an incredible game and in my opinion one of the best, but this one isn't quite up to par. SCP-450 was meant to be made into VR as well, but it seems like the production is on halt. The graphics are very fuzzy and you can't use electronics. You only have glow sticks, and there isn't really anything else you can do aside from drop those glow sticks. Some commenters on Reddit weren't pleased, saying things like, life, loathe it, or ignore it, you can't like it. And the developer defending himself over constructive criticism, saying things like the final game will be more polished, and this isn't the final product. But like, you uploaded the video to Reddit to get tips and criticism. Stop making excuses and take input from the community, man. Like, all one guy suggested is that you add an animation for cracking a new glow stick. Dude, come on, there's no need to get all defensive. You literally posted it there for this reason. And at 7, SCP-427. SCP-427 is a small, spherical, ornately carved locket of silver material. The carvings don't appear to affect the abilities of the object in any way, though. This SCP was created by man after test putting a pill from SCP-500 into the input booth of SCP-914. In the center of the locket, when opened, is a small glowing orb that's visible at the center. This orb emits no radiation. When the object is opened and exposed to biological tissue, it rapidly regenerates cellular damage and is able to fight off infections. It can fight off the common cold in 4 minutes. But long-term exposure is a significant risk to any persons using SCP-427. If used for too long, the personnel involved in the experiment begins mutating into a shapeless mass of flesh. These beasts created by the SCP are incredibly aggressive and cannot communicate or understand personnel, and due to these reasons are classified as Keter, the most aggressive of the bunch, and must be killed immediately. It's like, oh dang. This can be found in the game SCP Containment Breach, and I am unsure if it has any effect on the player, so it's free, so go play it and tell me. And at 6, SCP Breakout. SCP Breakout is a Roblox game that is honestly not terrible, but it's number 6 because it's a Roblox game. Its design, honestly, oh my god, just terrible. All the models used are free, so you could find them everywhere. The layout of the containment is terrible and irrational. There are ladders to the observation rooms inside the actual containment chambers. This map makes no sense, okay? Everything you see, you can see everywhere else. The actual signs for the SCPs are huge, and just everything about it is an eyesore, but it's still not the worst. The game is confusing as hell too. You join in and it's just everything at once. Plus now you need to figure out what the hell you're supposed to do, and the SCPs can just camp the spawn room and assassinate you as soon as you spawn. It's terrible. You shouldn't play it. And at 5, SCP-1633. This game was advertised with the ability to adapt to you. Whenever you would close the game, a file would be created teaching the AI about your movements. But it soon became clear that the AI would take the most convoluted twists to get to you. They wouldn't try to kill the player, but would instead break them mentally. After 7 or more hours of playing this game, the monsters would learn how the user plays their character. If they were defensive, the monsters would be too, halting their progression. And if the user was using their mind as a tool, the monsters would constantly disorient them just so they couldn't do anything. I just think that any game should do this. Find a way to have this concept work. Not the evil monsters part, but the file creating after you save and quit that teaches the AI how you play. That sounds great, and that would never create Skynet, right? And at 4, the SCP Foundation, SCP Site-7. This is just the most mundane form of SCP entertainment out there. This Roblox game has no original models, nothing to do other than maybe run around screaming, and a boring layout altogether. It's like my old high school during lunch. Boring, bland, and the only thing people did was walk in circles. I don't even think Site-7 has anything to do with SCP lore. Are there any SCPs actually listed as being contained at Site-7? I don't know, but I feel like the facilities at least have 3 numbers, like 104 or 666. You know, only the good numbers. Aside from that, the gameplay is bland. Nobody can be an SCP, which is, to be honest, what we all want to be, because we all want to be the monster, and to my knowledge, nobody on this list gives you that ability. Only Secret Laboratory, which is my second favorite, first being SCP-3008, because, yes. Let me play more of that game, please. And at 3, SCP Containment Breach. SCP Containment Breach is a free-to-play first-person horror game. You play as a human test subject, but your goal is to escape from the underground SCP Containment Center after a security breach that has also let dangerous anomalies escape. The game is procedurally generated, meaning it's generated off a selection of pre-existing rooms and hallways, so no two games will ever be the same, unless you play it too much. You also have to play the game. You can't Stanley Parable this game. If you refuse to leave your cell, you will be quickly terminated with poisonous gas. The SCP Foundation is so nice, aren't they? This game also has the mechanic of blinking, which lets the SCPs get closer to you and basically makes the game a hell of a lot more difficult. In the real world, we don't see our blinks for the most part, unless we are looking for them. But in this game and in this situation, they are so painfully long. Finally, in at number 1, Site 17. Again, I don't actually know if there are any SCPs actually contained at Site 17, but I'm not going to look through each and every one of them in an effort to find out, so I'll just have you tell me in the comments if I'm right or wrong. This game is an atrocity. Like the combination of Doc Ock, Anti-Venom, and Walker Sloan. The game is loud, like hella loud. There is a siren that is constantly playing while you're in the game. And even if you turn the volume down, it's still loud as all hell. The free models used are terrible and the amount of polygons needs to be increased, but it only gets worse from there. The game is dark, and I mean like light level -3 here, not like dark as in gritty, which would be good. The map is lame, hardly anything works properly, the community is terrible, and the roleplay server is even worse. Yeah, there's a roleplay server for this fucking thing. Even the people who are complaining about this game are being toxic. Like, if you're trying to make something good out of this terrible game, try not to be as toxic as like 80% of this game's fan base. If you can even call them fans. I'm really mad.